welcome back to the Yarra Valley Living Centre. And again, we have with us Hedy Sussman for the Living Well series. And she's actually still with us here in the Yarra Valley. So it's wonderful that we can have another session together. So how are you enjoying your stay?
I'm just loving it, Morny. This is a very beautiful place. So for people who are thinking about coming, do come. It's just beautiful. So yeah, it's a very idyllic setting.
And you're helping a lot with many things. So thank you for that. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, it's good.
So where we got to in the last conversation, we were talking about that sense of belonging, that you said that in your whole life, you never really had a sense of belonging. And belonging is such a basic need for all of us. So, yeah, how did you manage life with a feeling of not belonging? And I think many people have it.
I think many people do. I think there are many aspects. We were talking about shame. I think I touched on shame, also on belonging, and that's where my studies initially were centered on. But it also can be quite misleading, as I found the way I was thinking about belonging. I mean, certainly I felt disconnected. So it was something I was really aware of. I thought it was as a result of moving from one country to another, of being in a sort of hybrid situation in terms of my family of origin, also going into another Australian family at some stage. I had a very different culture. So all these things, and you know, I tended to be sort of shuttled around when I was quite young, when we came to Australia, to a number of different places. So, you know, there was that sense of instability, that was that sense of who do I really belong to, where is my sense of home. So it really, what I found, I guess, you know, to simplify it, what I found really in the end, it wasn't that I didn't belong. I had disconnected myself through my emotional makeup. Whereas belonging, generally, it's like the other party, whether they're going to accept you or not. And I found in the end that it was my sense of not belonging that was keeping me apart, not communities keeping me apart. So there's quite a strong distinction. And I guess that I had to come to an understanding of what it was and why I felt that way. And so it's very much connected with that shame issue. Shame.
Just going back a bit, because I think some may not have heard the first session. So you came from which country?
I was born in Austria, and I was born during the war. I was a Holocaust child. And that, I think, has an impact in terms of how one sees the world. You don't necessarily know what's going on, but you certainly feel everything. So you take in the world through your feelings. And I think my mother was certainly traumatized. My father didn't make it. And that was the very constrained environment that we brought to Australia when we came here.
So you're pretty much displaced as a beginning, right? Just
displaced because of culture, displaced because my mother looks so different.
Did she?
Yes. And I wanted to be an Aussie. I wanted belonging. I wanted to join up with, you know, the Aussies and to have a parent that looked like an Aussie. And my mother used to wear long flowing skirts, very colorful, that, you know, really were very gypsy-like. And, you know, for the most of my life and association with her, I would warn people if I was going to take them to meet her that, look, my mother's very different. She looks like a gypsy. And I recall at one stage a girlfriend of my son's coming back and saying, "Oh, I love the way your mother dresses," you know. But for me, it was very different, you know, twin sets and pearls would have been ideal, not a gypsy skirt.
Yeah, but then you were adopted, fostered into a
fostered.
Australian, what you call an Australian family.
Australian family.
It's hard to say what an Australian is because we've all come in the last few hundred years.
Yeah. But I think there's a strong association with shame, as I said, and that was, I guess, a point of, for me, a revelation. What was this shame about? But I think it's a very common, as we're talking about, non-belonging is common, but also shame is quite common. And in my case, shame meant covering up, trying to hide vulnerabilities. And as long as one is in hiding, as long as one is masking, then you actually can't become close to people because you're masked. You don't want them to see who you really are. You can't reveal yourself. So that's where I guess I had to unthread this notion of belonging and non-belonging, because really it was to do with shame. Shame was keeping me from belonging, not a sense of not being allowed to join a certain club. It was my shame that was keeping me from belonging.
Shame about what?
Well, initially I didn't know, and it's taken still some years to understand why I felt shamed, because I didn't understand. I mean, it's not that I'd had an unblemished life, but certainly there was nothing major there. And in my case, I found that I felt shame because I was fearful of people. So I connect that with my antecedents, my birth situation. I was terrified, actually. So I had to cover that up. That was my vulnerability. And I didn't want that to show. So I masked it so people would think I was arrogant, something like that. I think you made mention, you thought I had a great deal of confidence. I was terrified. And, aspects of that still remain. I still work on that.
And what you mentioned is that you put down the shame of being afraid.
Yes. I mean, nobody wants to present themselves as fearful. And that's exactly what I was, very fearful of people. And so this is the realization after a long time. It didn't come immediately. When I realized I was dealing with shame and not belonging, I had to pull out of my studies.
Yeah, tell us about that. What was the PhD you?
It was on liminality, and
liminality
meaning not this, not that. So I was doing on identity, liminal identity, meaning I'm not this, I'm not that, and therefore there's a sense of disconnection. There's a lack of community. I'm always marginal. So once I realized that it wasn't belonging that was the issue, it was shame was the issue. Then I had to go that step further. Well, what am I shamed about? And that I guess the answer to that query has only come recently, really recently. So it doesn't mean that in every issue of shame, it's going to be fear of people in my case. I think people construct their own shame, and it's something that's quite unique. I think shame has many faces.
So you've been studying this whole aspect of shame now for some years, or
no?
Months?
I didn't. I pulled out of studies and I didn't go near shame because I didn't want to touch it.
Yeah, sure.
The hero, I call, of that whole shame area is Brené Brown, and I got a quote of hers from somewhere I just picked up, but it really talks very much about vulnerability. And she says, I spent a lot of years trying to outrun or outsmart vulnerability by making things certain and definite, black and white, good and bad. My inability to lean into the discomfort of vulnerability limited the fullness of those important experiences that are wrought with uncertainty, love, belonging, trust, joy, and creativity, to name a few. So that shame holds us back. It's a prison, really. It holds us back from the belonging. It holds us back from the love, because we're not prepared to reveal our limitations, the vulnerability. And it takes a lot of, well, it's not a lot of effort, but it's a lot of learning to understand that vulnerability is the pathway we need to follow. Be vulnerable, be simple, be open, allow people to see. So I've been articulating this area of shame and what's behind the shame now publicly with you for the first time. I've not articulated this before. So it's sort of new to me. It's certainly new in revealing it publicly. And I see that as my desire to rid myself of it, give it oxygen. The more I say it, the less impacting it's going to be on me.
Yeah, and put it into the light.
Precisely, yeah. Shine a light on it. And I wanted to go. I'm practicing vulnerability, and this is the key. I think anyone that has suffered from shame, somehow or other that notion of being vulnerable seems terrifying. We're so adept at hiding, so wanting to hide that, that infirmity, whatever it may be, that, that's the last thing we want to do is reveal.
Yeah, and you mentioned I have visited you in Ballina, and your wall is full of masks.
Yes. With those masks there with good authority. I've used a number of those masks, not physically put on those masks, but metaphorically, I've worn them, and it keeps people at a distance. So that's not what one wants. We're all seeking love. We're all seeking connection. We're all seeking that communication, that energy that flows between people. So it stifled that for me.
So you said you are practicing vulnerability.
Yes.
So how do you practice vulnerability?
Well, I would say this is one big experiment of practicing vulnerability. I'm talking about it. I'm revealing it. And I'm hopeful that anyone that has a similar affliction hears what I'm saying and realizes there is a very simple pathway. It's like, let people know, and the reality is the shame that we carry needs not to be carried. There is no reason for shame. There's no authentic good reason for shame. So it's a burden. It's a totally unnecessary burden. And I feel at my time in life, I've carried it for so many years, but thank heavens, at this stage, at least I can say, well, it's time for it to go. It's time for it to move on. So yes, that's my practice now. In terms of how to do it other ways, I have a little group that comes together at my home fortnightly, and that would have been a very difficult thing for me to do. Very small for somebody else, easy. It's in your home. People come along, they discuss things between themselves. For me, it was a very big thing. Even inviting people to come along was like a step of courage. For someone else, it would be so minuscule, it would be so ordinary. For me, it was really big. So I guess that's another element. I've been confronting my fears. And once one starts doing that, one sees that the fears are not mountains, but molehills.
Why are you so afraid to invite people to your home?
Again, it's the fear of people.
Oh. them judging your home, judging you? What is it?
I not so much judging my home. I sort of worked with that a little. So it wasn't so much judging my home. I like my home. It was very much judging me and judging my ability to, I guess, hold a group of people in a common theme. It's leadership, let's say. I had to push myself. I really wanted to do it, but the thrust to do it, there was this push pull. I'd like to do it, but I don't. I'm frightened of inviting people. What if they say no? All of them say no to me.
Then it would be rejection.
Yes. I
you
mean,
don't want to be rejected.
No. So it has many aspects that the shame, and then I can be shamed that I've been rejected. Another cause for shame, and I think shame goes looking for rationale. Shame is looking for reasons not to stand up and be vulnerable.
Right.
Shame and vulnerability are sort of counterpoints really of each other. They're the polarities. One is open, inviting, one is closed, secretive. Yeah.
And how are the groups going?
I love them. Again, pushing through the fear is something that then becomes very rewarding. It's small, I've got a very small place, but the nourishment that comes from our discussions, deep sharing, genuine desire to look at who we are in the world, following that dictum of know thyself. So in that open forum, a very small group of us share, and I think it's nourishing to me personally. It's nourishing to the group. It's allowed me to get to know people that I didn't know in a town that I was new to, and forge deeper connections, because I met a number of people on a, you could say, sociable level, but it was they're thin, the relationships are thin, small talk, and I wanted something deeper. So it's allowed me to connect with people that also are exploring deeper models of their living.
Is it creating a feeling of belonging?
It does. I think of my group. Well, it's obviously not mine, but
collectively, everyone would say it's my group.
Yes. And initially, it was termed spiritual circle, I think, something like that. And I just like the idea of putting it down, sort of fairly ordinary title, conscious conversations. And I don't know, it's sort of again normalized. Sometimes I think the word spiritual holds people at a distance. It's like it's sort of, you've got to leap up. I'm not certain if I'm spiritual. So conscious conversations, I think, is open to everybody. So even the name change made a difference. Yeah.
And they say, like in that book, Power versus Force.
Yes. Yeah.
He talks about shame. Yeah. He talks about shame and
the frequency,
apathy as being like on the lowest level. Like it's even better. He says, even anger's higher frequency. At least you have some motivation.
Yes,
but
anger's
shame,
got power.
apathy. It's really the lowest. It's just above death, really.
Well, there you go. They talk about near-death experiences. I think people, and I might have been having a near-life experience.
Right, yeah. Near life.
Just sort of facsimile of for living it, and not throughout effort. I mean, effort was there, but there are certain, I guess it goes back to that principle I talked about earlier. I feel as if one, rather than just sit and ask for the help of the divine, which I certainly did over many years, I actually feel that we have to mine our events, whatever they are, whatever's going on in our lives. We have to put in a certain amount of effort. And I think of that Pareto principle, 80-50, that split. And I see it as I put in 20%, the divine puts in 80%, that makes 100%.
Yeah.
And things started to shift. That's how my healing came about. I started mining my circumstances. This really came about as a result. These revelations came about as the gift of leukemia. The gift of leukemia led me to start mining my anxieties, started to, I guess, move into that question, well, what is happening? And that discomfort just becomes unbearable after a while, and one has to do something about it. It's like having your back against the wall. You have to move. You can't go back any further.
Mm. And what about, this must be one of your first kind of encounters living with other people since you have embraced vulnerability. So how's it going?
Well, it's going well. I say really honestly that I think I'm, in terms of healing in that area, I think I'm about 60%. I'm not there. I work on it. I call in my guides. I call in the notion of God, the divine. I call that in, and I need the help. And so perhaps what I will say is that this encounter of being in a community, and it's not my first, but it's certainly been the easiest. So that I can attest, in terms of my ability to be fluid in situations. So, I look at that, I'm aware of that. And so it makes it a much more pleasurable experience than being very tense and hope I'm doing all right and wishing and hoping and the rest of that song. So it makes a big difference. Yeah. I really sort of look at that opportunity that sometimes illness presents as a way forward. I think it's there for a reason. I think it truly can become an opportunity. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is going to be, quote, healed, but I think one is going to be relieved, released in a number of different ways. And it's a pathway to a freedom, a relaxation that I think everybody, by doing that work, can experience. May not be your illness will suddenly go away. There are many forms of, victories, and it may not always be the absence of illness, but it is absolutely the pathway of a more freer, a more comfortable way of being in the world. And I think that's important. Dis-ease and dis-ease, the lack of ease, I think really, quite profound. It's a profound word, really, when we're in discomfort. Dis-ease, what comes along illness.
Was it a bit of a miracle, your recovery?
My hematologist certainly believed it was, but to the point that he didn't believe it, I have to say. He then questioned whether I'd actually ever had leukemia. So, basically, because I'd moved to a new place, he was a new hematologist. So I referred him back to his buddy who had been treating me in Sydney and to my records there, because, I wanted to know how I was doing. I wanted to know whether this was frequent. I didn't know very much about my illness. And so it's like, does this happen very often? And he said basically never. So, leukemia is a fatal illness. That's the way they talk of it. So I knew I was feeling a whole lot better, but I didn't know I was going to be that better and that well. So that came as a little surprise. Yeah, yeah.
And you say that probably you would say 60% you've gone on the journey of accepting and removing shame and all of that. So what are you going to do with the other 40%?
I've got work to do still on the same subject. I haven't given up on those subjects. That's still my meditation practice. I still do the work of going into incidents that, suddenly I feel, suddenly there's that familiar feeling that I've known all my life. And it's like, what has triggered that? I need to go into it. I need to bring it up. And I think a really important part is naming it, not just saying I've got shame. Too big. It's a universal. It's got to be broken down. So the way I do it is I go into it, and it's when I felt XYZ, I go into the incident and then release it to a higher power. And there's a little meditation that I do myself, in how I basically, it's a healing meditation, how I work in this area that I think is quite potent. And I think people can use their own images, but if you're an image person, it sort of shows you really that pathway of releasing our individual angst, releasing that individual thing that only you know about, secret to everybody else. But it is the doorway, it's a portal to a much freer and really comfortable life, of joy, really authenticity. So who wants to be in hiding? Who wants to be master all the time? Only for the balls, not the rest of the time.
So would you be able to guide us in that meditation? Probably it's a nice time to do it.
So this is a healing meditation that I've used, and I found it really freeing up. So I'm going to imagine, first of all, maybe if you just close your eyes, because we're going to go on a little visual journey. And you're going to imagine yourself as a farmer. And in front of you is a field, and it's plowed beautifully, long straight lines going to the horizon. This is your field. It represents your life. And as you look down those furrows, you'll see little kinks, little bits of soil sticking out, a clump here, a clump there, a rooted object, maybe a stone. And as you go to each one of those to straighten the furrow, you think about an event that has bedeviled you, that has stayed with you long after the event has passed. You think about it and you can nominate it. It has a little narrative. And you name it and you think, this represents, maybe it's a habit that you're wanting to rid of. Maybe it's a time you were less kind to somebody. All these little crooks and little nodules in your lovely, straight lined paddock, your field, they represent little aspects in your life that you want to really regenerate, transform. And so as you go to them and think about your own events, as you go, you take a little handful of soil and you offer it up to the divine, to the great spirit, to the great healer. And you say, this represents this event, and I don't want it anymore. It's no longer mine. And you just hold it out and allow the Great Spirit, God, your choice of words there, whatever it may be, to regenerate that soil, to transform it so it becomes productive. And then you place it back in the furrow and you straighten that furrow. And this you do with every little nodule, every rooted area that seems to be not in that straight line. What you're looking for is the free flowing of energy, nothing to impede it. Energy flows without obstacles. That is a representation of good health, good physical, good mental, good spiritual health. And this is your task. On a daily basis, you go to your field, you look at your furrows, and you offer up that which is not perfect, which is not straight. You name it. And as you do this, you also think about what you would like to generate in the soil. And you imagine yourself holding over your shoulder, a bag. You're the farmer. And you take out of that bag beautiful seeds, ready, primed for germination. And you think about, what does that seed represent? What is it that I want to sow today in my life? What is it that I want to harvest today in my life? And so, as you remove a seed and plant it in the soil, you cover it with the soil, you think about how it's going to generate. Is it going to be a quick generation? Is it going to be one for the future? A heritage seed, something you sow long term. But this is the practice daily. Till your soil, straighten the furrows, regenerate the soil, and then plant your seeds on a daily basis. I found it a very liberating meditation. And I hope that you do, using your own images, something that speaks to you, that allows for that regeneration to take place. So I wish you well in this journey, peace and happiness. Om Shanti.